Okay, so it's recording.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Star Business Solutions webinar on designing workflow desktops. My name is Norman Hall. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Star Business Solutions. I've also got with me Josh Diffie, our pre-sales engineer, or as he likes to be called, our demo guy. Today's agenda will talk about workflow desktop basics, multiple desktops and utilizing bookmarks, alert collections and their usage within desktops, gaining more clarity with 3D Live. We'll also address some advanced features for desktops, and at the end we will be having a question and answer time. I would encourage you to type your questions as we go so that you don't forget them, but bear in mind that we will not be actually answering any of them until the end of the webinar. Just as an FYI, our next webinar will not be until next year. We're taking a little bit of break over Christmas period, so in February will be the next one of the Star webinar series. Okay, I'll hand it over to Josh now, and he can start the demonstration and the webinar.
Alrighty, all. So we're going to jump on in. So we'll cover through some of the key points that Norman just went through. So what we'll definitely be covering is some examples today, as well as a little bit of training on some of the different functions and features and how you can use them within the workflow desktops. So if I just jump on into my desktop designer, it's a fairly easy or simply laid out screen. We can see the three tabs being layout, availability, and security. Now, we won't be going through every single possible field that you might be interested in or that might be available on the workflow desktops. We'll be covering some of the key points or key basic points as we go through. So if I was just to bring up a desktop, so the idea of a desktop is it uses a grid layout where you can have up to 10 rows by 10 columns. Within that, you can define how you wish. So this one, while it looks like there is just 3 tiles on my desktop, that is showing 4 rows and 6 columns, because you have the ability of merging or splitting to take up less space, more space, depending on just what it is that I'm interested in. So this desktop layout that I'm looking at right here is the desktop behind the screen. So here I can see my notifications tile required less space than the rest. So as a result, I've merged less cells or less tiles to get there. My favorites, especially in a demonstration purpose, I have quite a few in there. I've allowed for a little bit more space. Now, some workflow desktops, you might decide that you want to open up as their own screen. So you'll notice right now that while I've got my desktop designer open, or any other screen for that matter, it's covering up a large portion of my workflow desk. So this open as a window tick box allows it to do just that. If I now load that desk, you'll see that's just another screen, just like my desktop designer. I have the ability in the Windows section to flick between them as I need, and I can also open up as many desktops as I'd like. Now, this still has the draw card or the downside potentially, that if you've got multiple screens open, it's still potentially hidden. So what we have the ability of doing, or going that one step further, is ticking this show as separate. So you'll notice if I go down to my just Windows taskbar, I just have the one instance of Green Tree running. Now, if I hit show as separate and hit load desk, initially that might look like it's just opened it up as a screen, but it's actually opened it up as a separate instance. So I can flick between the two. Or potentially, if I have multiple monitors, I can show one desktop on a completely different monitor. Now I'm just showing just the one screen. So to kind of replicate or show that functionality, I'll just simply show the screens side by side. So I've still got that same drill down capability that you're all hopefully familiar with the Workflow desktop. So as I double click on, say, a favorite, it is opening up that screen in my primary Greentree instance. But that does allow you then to have multiple desktops and as many desktops as you'd like open. So depending on just what it is that you're trying to achieve, then that can be quite handy to show, as I said, multiple desks at the same time, or simply showing a more reportable desktop on a separate monitor. A couple of other key points. There is some availability and security options on a desktop designer. Now, depending on just what you're showing on a Workflow desktop, some of those may become less relevant than others. So for example, if I don't have access to accounts receivable invoices, that even if I was showing accounts receivable invoices on a Workflow desktop and I was able to open that desktop, that tile wouldn't show me any records. But that being said, there may be instances where you just simply want to reduce the amount of desktops available for people to see, or potentially they do have access to a certain module, but you don't want to give them access to certain information. So simply coming into the availability and defining who has access. Now in my demonstration system, I've simply got available to all users ticked on by far the majority of my desktops. But if I wanted to come in and say, well, only certain users or teams were available to use this, then I can simply select the appropriate users and move them across. When setting up a Workflow desktop, sometimes you might not have the data available in your live system because maybe you're starting a new line of business, maybe you're entering new information that you haven't entered before, or simply you wish to test it, records moving from one part of the business to the other. So we do have this import and export capability within Workflow desktops. So you can export an entire desk, import it into a test environment, or vice versa. You could have it in a test environment, testing it with various data entry or data processing, and then export it out of your test environment and import it into your live environment. The toolbox on the right-hand side here lists all the different types of things that you might want to show on a Workflow desk. So there's jobs, there's customer invoices, there's supplier invoices. There's quite a lot of different options within the toolbox, and we'll cover some more of those a few steps down the track. Now, Workflow desktops within Greentree really get their strength when you try to focus them rather than have necessarily one desk that covers every possible scenario that you might need as a user. So if I was someone in finance, for example, I might have a finance desktop. Okay, fairly high level information. So here I'm seeing some financial totals and some general ledger balances, which I might cover in a little bit more detail in a moment. But then maybe periodically, maybe once a week, once a fortnight, or whenever is appropriate, I have a debt collection role that I might do. Now, I wouldn't put all my outstanding invoices and every single piece of information that I require for that role or function on my finance desktop. I would simply open up the debt collection or whatever other desktop I was using at that point in time. Now, you'll notice that I haven't gone through the Workflow view desks and then selected which desktop I'm interested in. I've simply gone straight to a bookmark. So using bookmarks to launch desktops is what I find the best way of switching between desks. Now, to do that, it can be a little tricky. So if you do have a screen open, then of course, if I want to get to my, if I want to bookmark a record, you'll notice that it thinks it wants to bookmark the desktop designer, okay, which of course is not what we're trying to achieve right now. So what I can do, if I click the little icon down the bottom left-hand corner, which may have a different label depending on what you've called your desk. If I click that icon and then go Workflow Bookmark Record, you'll now notice that because I don't have a screen open, it realizes, oh, yes, I would like to bookmark a desktop. Now you can give this any name you'd like, of course. So while I have already got this bookmarked, just to finish off the example, I can give it a name. Now, if you're like me, I like to set my bookmarks and favorites into folder structures. So I can go Create In, and I can select which folder I would like to put it into. Now, this is obviously a workflow desk, so I would put it in the workflow desks folder. It's also worth pointing out that bookmarks and favorites also sort alphabetically. So you'll notice that most of my bookmarks and favorites I've numbered. So for example, this is Debt Collection version 2. So I might call this 2B and hit OK. And then next time if I just hit go, when my bookmarks refresh, they'll be ordered. Now, I won't go through all the specifics of adding images and so on at this point in time, but in that organize, if I right click on a bookmarks or favorite and hit organize, you can go through and change pictures or rename or delete or move depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. If you have set up bookmarks and favorites for the purposes of this kind of jumping between desks, or potentially they're more role-based favorites. Favorites and bookmarks are user-specific, so you also, just like your workflow desktops, can import and export those bookmarks and favorites and import them into another user if appropriate. So in my original desktop, I had a big, long list of favorites. So obviously, being a demonstration system, I might want to show some of the job cost, some of the CRM, some of the HR and payroll, and so on and so on. But when I'm jumping between specific desktops, i.e. I jump to the debt collection desktop, you'll notice that my favorites is much shorter. I'm not showing that big, long list that I was showing before. So within, excuse me, so within a toolbox, so within the toolbox, you can drag, as I said, various tiles onto the screen. And if I was to look at the favorites one as an example, each tile will have its own different set of favorites. Now the top section will look similar no matter where I am. So each tile will have its a caption, which you can call it whatever you would like. You have some additional options available to you. And then as you go further down, different options become available. So under favorites, it's a much shorter list. Whereas under, for example, AR invoices, there's a big long list about saying whether or not you can drill down, whether or not you want to show hold code filters, whether or not you're only showing transactions with an outstanding value, whatever it is that's relevant to that tile. Now the favorites, for example, as well as bookmarks, has an option to put in starting folder. So what this says is instead of showing my entire list of favorites, just go to the favorites starting at the folder called one.financials, which is what I called it. Now, of course, if you had a folder in your favorites called accounts receivable, then of course you could show that also. I'll, I guess, reiterate that favorites are user specific, but of course, workflow desktops do not need to be. So while each user might have their own favorites, if you're going to use this kind of concept within a workflow desktop, it's fairly critical that you at least have the folder structures with the same names. Otherwise, of course, when you open that desktop, it won't know which folder to go to if you haven't got that one set up against the user. So as I said before, each workflow tile will have different settings depending on what it is. So that if I go back to that AR invoices tile, yes, the caption is an option available to me. You've also got the ability to either hit Show as Table or Show Properties. Now, if I just move this screen a little bit, quite obviously, this workflow tile of AR invoices is in a table format, whereas the bottom left-hand tile, being my pending approvals, is Show as Properties. If you wish to show a record as a table, it really does need to be the same record type the whole way through. Whereas the pending approvals, obviously in this example, I'm showing customers, supplier invoices, purchase orders, and so on. So the properties is sometimes a little better of an option because you can mix and match just what you're showing. The other couple of points worth pointing out that for those that might be new to workflow desktops, the workflow desktops can be drillable if you give users access to. So where that becomes quite pertinent is you might give users access to view some outstanding information, but they're not allowed to go into that screen. So by all means, you could untick the Allow Drill Down option. You've also got this option of what we refer to as Drill Down Navigatable. So you'll notice that when I double click on one of these invoices, I can't navigate from left to right. The navigation buttons are gone. So that's another option that you've got available to really lock down to users to only see what you're giving them access to see via these workflow desks. Now, not every single record in Greentree will be listed as an option in the toolbox. So straight up here, we can see organizations, contacts, leads, quotes, appointments. And as I scroll through, there's a ton of other different ones, so jobs, invoices, purchase orders, etc. But it isn't every single record. What you have the ability of doing is using what we call alert collections to show on a desktop additional detail or additional records that there isn't a standard toolbox for. Now, there is a couple of things that you need to line up to make that work. So for example, I've got in here a workflow desk around asset management. Now, there isn't a toolbox tile for assets, but there is, if I scroll relatively close to the bottom, an option called alert collection. Now, when you select an alert collection tile, yes, you can still give it, of course, a caption, whether or not you're showing it as a table, and so on. And you also then get the option of dictating which alert collection it's going to be. To create an alert collection, it's fairly simple. I simply come into Workflow, Approvals and Alerts, Alert Collections. So this does require the Approvals and Alerts module. Within there, you can create, if I just come in and select my All Assets collection that I just created for this workflow desk, you select what record type it belongs to. And this is where, as I said, you can select any record type in Greentree to now show on a workflow desk. Now that's how you set up the alert collection, but you still need to populate that with records using approvals and alerts. Now that can be a fairly simple process, or it can be more detailed depending on just what it is that you're trying to show. Now in this example, I just want to show all assets. So I've got a very simple rule that I have set up. Now this isn't necessarily an approvals and alerts webinar or training session, so I'm going to skip over a number of these options. But the main point I'm going to here is that I can basically go through and say, well, if I'm not already in the alert collection, then add this asset to the alert collection. So anytime you create a new one, it's automatically going to be added to the list. Once within there, you'll also notice that there's not as many options as what there were when I was looking at the invoices. So there wasn't show hold codes, there wasn't the ability to show only outstanding and so on. To do that, the limiting of the records that you wish to show in that tile really falls within the approvals and alerts rule. To show or decide which fields you would like to show, you simply hit the table layout button. And this doesn't just relate to alert collections, it also relates to the AR invoice tile that I was showing before, or any other record type that you're showing within here. You then get the option of a drag and drop to the properties up the top and simply drag the properties that you're interested into the table below. So I'm keeping it fairly simple. I'm showing on my asset desktop a code, a serial number, and a description. But if there was some other form of information that you wish to add, it is fairly simple to just go through and find the field you're after. So maybe I'm after the owner of this asset and I want to show their name. You can click and drag and make that field bigger. You can right click and you get a number of options, including renaming the column. So this by default shows the database field name, which in most cases is probably not what you're going to want to show to your users. So I'm just going to come in and just replace that with the word owner and click OK. Now when I load this desk, I can now see that I've now got that additional column where it's now showing in a number of these instances, it's owned by the company I'm logged into, which is this eComputers Australia, whereas others are owned by this Kangan customer. Now you may have noticed that when I made a selection on this desktop, other tiles on my desktop populated with information. So as I click through, it's now showing, in this instance, as I click on that asset, it's showing me service history for that asset, usage history for that asset. If I use that debt collection desktop I was in just before, I have that same concept. So as I make a selection on an invoice, it's showing me the full current balances for that customer. So they don't just owe us $3,000 and a bit, they actually owe us $34,000. And here is how it's aged. Here are all the transactions, and here's the contact details. So with that, that's what we refer to as 3D Live tiles. Now, 3D Live tiles are an option within a toolbox. So if you scroll relatively close to the bottom, I can see 3D Live. Now, if I simply bring up that debt collection desk again and simply add a new one. So there's currently no space to add a 3D Live tile, so I can click on here, and as we can see, it's 3 rows by 3 columns, and outstanding invoices is taking up 2 rows. If I decide, you know what, I don't need you to take up as much space, I select Split Down, and then I'm going to click and drag the 3D Live tile into that empty box now on the bottom right-hand corner. That will then pop up a 3D Live panel configurator. Now, the 3D Live tiles are a little bit more advanced or have a bit more complicated features to them than simply dragging and dropping a standard tile. So for starters, you need to know what is referred to as the trigger class. Okay, so for this, it's the record that you either click on a workflow desk or select in a screen that you wish to trigger this 3D Live tile to populate with information. Now, I'm on the debt collection desktop, so I'm going to select AR invoice. Now you can be quite specific and say only update this when you click this record in a certain screen, but I'm not going to do that for today. I'm simply going to do it wherever I select that record. The type, now here you can either show an attribute, so the contact details down the bottom is just that, it's what's referred to as an attribute, where you've got the ability of picking and choosing fields that relate to the record you've just selected. The top right-hand corner, where I've got the balances, is an attribute tile type as well. You've also got the option of showing images. So that is the ability of looking at attachments against the specific record I'm on and show an image of a certain type on a workflow desk. Now, where this becomes quite handy is when you have inventory and you wish to show images of those inventory items. But for the moment, I'm just going to go with the collection type. And by doing that, that has added an additional couple of features or configuration options where I can now go, well, what do I actually want to show? So on an AR invoice, do I want to show the line items on the AR invoice? Do I actually want to go to the customer that belongs to that invoice and maybe show some of their details? So I can already see I'm showing their outstanding invoices. Maybe as part of this role, when I'm talking with the customer, I might want to tell them that they have some sales orders outstanding. Maybe they wish to pay their bills before these sales orders are going to be delivered. So I can come in here, select that type, and then you can limit it to a specific what we call class. So at the moment, this one's fairly obvious. I want to show the sales orders, but there are a number of different options around that. In doing so, what that's now allowed me to do is same deal as before. I have this table layout option as well as a 3D live caption. So the 3D live caption is very similar to the captions that we've seen on the other tiles to date. However, this allows you to also show database fields. So I can, for example, show the customer name by dragging and dropping that in and saying sales orders. So what this is going to do is when I select a specific invoice, it's going to rename that to be, for example, Kangan Education Unit sales orders. You can also do a query on this. So you don't necessarily want to show all sales orders. Maybe you only want to show ones that are outstanding or of a certain status. So if I hit define a query, this opens up the record selection tool, which if you're familiar with approvals and alerts is very similar. And we will see this tool in a number of additional spots throughout Workflow desktops as well. Excuse me. So what I might do is I might keep it fairly simple, and I might simply go to the status, and I'm going to say where the status is of entered. So I simply double click, type in what I wish the status to be, and I've got a number of options such as is equal to, is not equal to, contains, starts with, and so on. It really just depends on what type of filtering we wish to do. And I'm going to click OK. The table layout, which is the screen that we were in just before, will automatically put a number of fields it thinks you might want on a Workflow desktop. Now this is showing things like drop sequence, run number, the sales order reference, the customer order number, and the date. Now I might not want all those fields, so I can right click and remove the columns that I don't need. Now don't be too afraid. If I remove ones that I actually do want, or I just want them back at a later stage, I can simply come back in and drag and drop that back into the desktop. Now I won't go through and rename all the fields because I did just go through that just before, but I might decide that I want to rearrange some of the columns. You also have, for example, a date column here. You can right click and go data format, and this allows you to do a fairly basic date format option. So for example, maybe I want that as 4 digits for the year, or maybe I'm more interested in 2 digits. You could decide that depending on obviously what real estate you've got available on your desktop. So if I just hit load desk now, you'll notice that I've now got this blank tile down the bottom as well. So when I make that selection, that's now populating. There are 4 sales orders with a status of entered that are against the Kangan Education Unit. And if I click on Highstone, I see they only have 1, and Willers, they have 1 as well. So it's fairly quick and easy to get 3D live tiles on a desktop. And it really adds a lot of features or a lot of flexibility to reporting, as well as assist with especially data entry roles or processes that involve a lot of information, like, for example, a debt collection desktop. Now, I've shown sales orders. You could have just as easily shown quotes if that's an area you're interested in. You could be showing open jobs if you're more of a job cost focused environment. It's completely up to you to decide what information you would like to show, but any record that you can link back to another record that's on your desktop already, you've got that ability of flowing that through. So some additional features that you may have seen already on my Workflow desktop is that some of these records were showing in orange, and some of the other desktops, there were some yellow fields and so on. So if I was to look at the AR invoices tile as an example and go to table layout, so for starters, you'll notice my outstanding amount is showing in yellow. So you do have the ability of right-clicking on a column, and from there you can color this specific column. So if there's information you wish to highlight to your users, then you have that ability by doing just that. You'll also notice on the left-hand side, I've got my existing row highlight rules. So if the invoice, which is in that collection, is on hold, show it in gray, and if it's over 90 days old, show it in orange. So you can add your own rules. Alternatively, if you click on one of these, you can edit an existing rule. So a rule allows you to add what's referred to as a foreground color, which plainly put is the color of the text, and a background color, which is fairly obvious, and then it gives you an example of what that selection looks like. If I hit edit rule, this is the same screen that we were just in before for that defining a query. So I can scroll through, find the fields I'm interested in, and then compare them with either another database field, or like I had that status before, I can do that also. So this one is comparing the payment date with the current period, whereas the hold code is checking the hold code status and checking that it's that the hold option is true. Now, in most cases, when you're looking at highlighting rules, you'll be comparing it with a specific or comparing a specific field with a piece of information that's specific to that desktop. So for example, this one is just checking that the hold code is true. If I was to just very quickly jump over to just one more example. I've got a soon to expire certificates on my HR desktop, where I'm comparing the expiry date of a human resource management certificate with today's date. So the debt collection desktop looked at the current period, whereas this one looks at today. So there aren't too many keywords that you can use within these record selection. It's pretty much the word today, and then you can put a plus or minus, and then a number. So you'll see that the expiry date is before today plus 30. So if you're trying to compare something with a future date, then of course that would be plus. If you're trying to compare it with a historical date, then of course that would be a negative. So in this example, I'm saying, is the expiry date between now and 30 days from now, versus if it was expired for more than 30 days, then of course it would be today less 30. Now, pretty much all the examples so far simply had one line in my record selection criteria, but of course you can add additional ones in here as well. By simply clicking and dragging and adding as many as you'd like, you can simply remove a line if it's no longer required, and depending on what the field is, will dictate what the options available to you. So as I select the reference, which has a little green box with an A in it, which means it's a text field, I get things like is equal to, contains, starts with, and so on. But if I select the expiry date, which is a date field, as you can see by the two slashes in an orange box, the options are different. So depending on what the field is, Greentree will assist you with trying to get that record selection criteria options right down. In addition to the color coding, which you can do, and you can have as many rules as you'd like, the rules will simply start at the top and work their way down. So if it's expired, show it in red. Now, and if it expires in 30 days, you may have I've noticed that I didn't say that expiry date was after today. I didn't need to, because the first rule would have caught it if it's already expired. So if I was just to go through a couple more examples of some of the advanced features you've got available to you. So if I load my finance desk, which I had a little bit before, and for those that were paying attention, you may have seen this total bar up the top, where I can see there's $160,000 worth of purchase orders net. Then I can see that right there. If I was to click on that tile and hit table layout, there's a number of summary options. So you can add a total, the average, the minimum, the maximum, and a count. So depending on what it is you're trying to show here, then of course will dictate just what you need to see. The average, minimum, and maximum didn't make too much sense on an outstanding purchase order workflow tile. The count and totals may, and you can give them different colors, so foreground and background as well. You can say whether or not the summary is at the top or the bottom. You can say whether or not you show the summary only, and you can say whether or not it's defaulted to collapsed. So I'm going to tick that box as well. So when I hit load desk now, you'll notice I'm not seeing too much, but there's this icon here which says expand or collapse rows. If I tick that button, I get my purchase orders, or I can hide them. What this allows you to do is show more tiles on a workflow desktop summarized, because what you have the ability of doing with workflow tiles, as you can see by this icon that's on every single one, which has a little rectangle with an arrow, I can click on that and it will pop that out. And much like when I opened the workflow desktop separately earlier on, you'll notice that that's opened it as a new instance. So I can flick between the two if I need to. So if I am interested in quite a lot of information, maybe I've got a number of branches, maybe I've got a number of warehouses that I need to keep track of, and I'm showing all the outstanding packing slips or sales orders or whatever else it is I'm interested in for each one of those warehouses as a separate tile, then what that allows me to do is show them all collapsed, summarized, and then maybe if I have more than 10, then that's a bit of a red flag for me, and I can see that straight off the bat and click the pop out or pop up as I need to. I come back into my table layout. Now, one of the other things that you might find or you might like to see within a workflow desk is that net amount that I was showing just there was a basic number field. Now, just like I went on the date, I can right click and go data format. And in this example, it's not after a date format, it's after decimal places. So if I'm talking about purchase orders at fairly high value, and maybe I don't have much space on a workflow desktop, I might not need the decimal places. So I simply hit 0. Now when I hit load desk and expand, you'll notice that those decimal places are gone. The other options you've got available to within the table layout, you'll notice that even the data fields, so numbers, dates, and so on, have a little plus next to them. So if I look at the net amount and press the little plus, you'll notice it gives me a number of different options. Now this will differ depending on what I am looking at, but you'll see I've got currency format, I've got a number of other ones, but the currency format is the example I'd like to use for this one. If I was to click and drag that and just show it side by side, and I won't rename this field, but of course I've got that ability to do so. When I hit load desk, I can now see that I have the dollar sign, I have the comma, and then I have the decimal places. Now, because that has now got non-numeric fields, it's treated as a text field, so it's aligned it to the left, and it won't be included in the totals. But while it may not be included in the totals, you still have the option of right aligning or left aligning, depending on what it is that you're after. So you do have under alignment, left, center, or right, depending on just what it is that you're trying to show. Okay, so that's the basics for workflow desktops. That's showing multiple desktops for a user, utilizing bookmarks, the ability of using alert collections, which was things like the assets example to populate data on a workflow desktop, using 3D Live Tile to show information that might be relevant to a workflow desk or role, and some of those advanced features around highlighting rules, queries, or additional table options by dragging the formatted text in. So we'll open up the questions to the floor and start our question and answer time. Okay, so I've got a question. Can you do this process as a favorite instead of a bookmark? So favorites are shortcuts to screens. Bookmarks are shortcuts to records. So a workflow desktop is a record, not specifically a screen, although you might sometimes think of it that way. So as a result, you can only bookmark workflow desktops. You don't have the option of setting it as a favorite. Another question, or probably more of a statement: if you use the currency format, you cannot sort by value. That's correct. So when you sort your tables within the workflow desktops, so if I was to go back to that desktop I had before, if I'm sorting by a numeric field, it will sort numerically. If I'm sorting by a text field, like the supplier name, it will sort alphabetically. And because we have now shown it the net amount as a text field, it is sorting alphabetically, not numerically. So yes, that's correct. The formats that you use could have an effect on use, such as sorting options. Can I show how to call or select an image to show on a 3D live tile? I sure can. So if I bring up my desktop designer again, and I'll bring up one that I know I have some images of inventory items. So I'll have to load this desk. So I have a 3D live tile, which is up the top right-hand corner, that when I open up an inventory item, it populates with the image of the inventory item. So how did I get that there? Well, there's a couple of key things to keep in mind. First of all is what we call the attachment type. So if I click on the attachments and have a look at my photo, you'll notice I have an attachment type called image in my demonstration system. I have a number of other ones as well, by the way, but that's the important one for this example. So when I go to my desktop designer and click on the image tile or 3D live tile and select the stock item, when I have an image type 3D live tile, you have to select which attachment type you wish to show. So in this example, obviously I'm showing the image. If I was to have shown the photo option, then it would have looked for an attachment against the inventory item of that type, not found one, and subsequently not been able to show an image. On the flip side to that, if you do wish to show multiple images of an inventory item or any other record, so maybe you have a detailed specification sheet of some items that you wish to store as an image, as well as an image of the inventory item, then you could set them up as different attachment types and then subsequently show them both on a workflow desk. If you double click on an attachment type, it will, let me just, that's popped up on a different screen. It will open that in whatever image tool that I've got that image type set to. So this was a PNG, so it opened it up in my Snagit editor, but depending on what it is that you're trying to show is what will show it there. One of the questions was, will the webinar notes be distributed? So these webinars are recorded and attendees will get notified within.
There's an automatic email that will go out to everyone who has attended around about this time tomorrow with a link that will take you to the recording of the webinar. You should also be able to download the webinar on your own laptop, or that way you can show it and share it with other people at your workplace. If you don't get it, please let me know.
One of the other questions there, can you use the any attachment type? You sure can. And what if you have multiple attachments as one type? So there is a tick box available on the attachments. If I go back to my, excuse me, my screen, called primary. So if there are multiple attachments of the same type, it'll try and find the one with primary. If you don't have primary ticked on any of them, then I believe it grabs the first attachment it finds of that type.
Okay, we've still got time for more questions, so you might as well take advantage and pick Josh's brains. So any more questions before we call it a day? Nope. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I just firstly like to thank Josh for the webinar information. I actually picked up a little bit more myself today, which was good. I'd also like to thank everyone who logged in today for the webinar. Our next webinar will be in February next year, after the Christmas and silly season's over. As I said before, the recording should be automatically issued tomorrow to everyone who's attended. There should also be a link going to those who registered but were unable to attend today.
Just had a couple of last minute comments or questions come through.
Okay, good.
One of them was around the notes or the information covered in today, but more specifically, some of the attendees, I understand, might not currently be using workflow desktops or approvals and alerts. So if this is something that hopefully you found quite useful today, then of course get in contact with your primary consultant and ask them to talk you through maybe more specific examples that might relate to your system. In addition,
as you probably guessed, Josh did fly through all of the information today. So as he said, if you require more information or more help, contact your STAR consultant. It's a little bit hard to catch Josh. He's very busy at the moment, so go to your STAR consultant. If you actually need some training on specifics that come from today, then once again your consultant can arrange that for you. We did send out a EDM approximately 1 week ago that advised that there is a current discount on various modules of Greentree and getting extra users, which goes up until just before Christmas. So now might be the perfect time if you've seen something you like here and you don't have the functionality already, that you can contact your STAR consultant or our BDMs, and they will be more than happy to help you out. So once again, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it. Hopefully you're getting value out of these webinars. If you have any specific topics you'd want us to cover, please feel free to email me or Josh or your consultant, and they'll pass it on to myself. We do have a list for next year already, which we're planning to address. And lastly, I'd just like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And just note that STAR will have a reduced staffing level between Christmas and the 7th of January. And then everyone will be back on board. We will have staff during that period, but just not as many at the office. So once again, thank you.